Hi, I'm Robin Gully.
I'm John Justin.
We are your Ward 2 council people here in West St. Paul, here to give you the council recap. So we started off the night with our open council work session as usual, and a bit of good news actually. Not that we don't always bring all good news, but
I'd love if that were true.
we had a report from our finance director who came back and said that because of ARPA funding and also, which was the American Rescue Act funding, so federal funding, along with some other just examinations of the budget, they were able to decrease the recommendation for levy from 6.03% for a levy increase. I'm sorry, from 6.03% to
8.4 down to
down
6.03. That's the direction we want to go.
News.
Yeah,
yes.
It's lower. Lower is better for levies.
It's lower. We've talked about property taxes in the past. I don't know if I can do a sufficient job of explaining what that actually means, and it'll be a while before we have like a concrete sense of what that means. But effectively, so the city gets so we have to vote on a levy every single year. And so unlike places where you can say like, just say, okay, like, these prices are going up or whatever, like we just have to charge more. We actually, like, every single year we have to vote on how we take in taxes.
Yep.
And so to cover even costs like inflation, we effectively have to raise the levy, and we try to do it as little as possible because we know that it's complicated, right? But it also pays for all the stuff that we do in the city, from having great streets and snow plowing, which we're going to talk about later, to having,
police and fire response.
Everything that we do in the city, which is a lot. And so it is really important that, we are good stewards of those resources, and we try really hard. And so anyway, the good news is that at this moment,
we have dropped it.
We've dropped it.
Almost 2.5%.
Which is a lot.
Which is a lot.
Yeah.
And we're not done yet. This will come back in front of us probably in September. And the budget and the levy are inextricably linked. You can't just decide to lower the levy. In order to lower the levy, you have to change the budget. And move things out of the budget, reapportion funds, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of a big picture sort of thing, but it sounds like staff did a fantastic job of figuring out how to work some of the things that we have, how to actually use some funds that we had accrued for other things. And it's not an easy job, and so there's always, I'd love to say that we go through with a little red pen and cross things out and whatever, but we operate at kind of a broader stroke sort of thing, and then staff actually implements, and every time we always come back. I don't think I've ever heard a discussion where anybody has heard the preliminary levy, which would have been before this, and been like, awesome, done, don't do anything. Every time the request is, can you find ways to lower it? Can you find ways to cut it? And every time we find things, and it's a real process, and that's the sort of, you get that preliminary thing, and then you can really do the sort of the deep dive into, and staff does the deep dive into what can be moved, eliminated, defrayed without any cost, things like that, and still also always to remind everybody, also paying down the overall debt, which in the long term, and we're getting closer and closer, we're doing a good job bringing that debt down, will eventually get us to the point where these levies may start to actually shrink naturally with less work. And that's the goal. And so, we're staying on path with that. I always want to mention that because I know people are worried. Are we still, just pushing off Robert Street? We're not. We're paying down on that at an increased rate from where we were before, and we're finding ways to do that. So without making the burden go up on individuals and taxpayers.
Yeah. I will say that if you are the kind of person who likes to look at this stuff with with a little red pen, or, a red pen that like adds things, go to the city website and take a look at the budget and see what we're working on. The other thing is that we're always trying to be conscious of how we make our city better. So And sometimes we can do that by reallocating funds from like something that we were doing before to something that we're doing that we think is more worthwhile.
Yeah.
But we are always trying to use every dollar as effectively as
I think we're
possible.
also benefiting already from having a full-time grant writer on staff, which was something we did not have before. And I think we've seen multiple points where things have come forward and it's fully funded by a grant that we've gotten, which is the dream come true. So we're trying to do as much of that as possible too. So, time for snow removal. Long time coming. We've had some discussions on this before, and I've gotten a lot of complaints about some of the situation with snow removal north of Butler on Robert. And we asked staff to come back with a solution because it is something, that we have two portions below, south of Butler, the city removes the snow, and then that's assessed to the business owners. North of Butler, it's all on the recognizance of the business owners. The city doesn't do snow removal up there. And certainly last year, I think we saw some real problems with that. I'm obviously not going to mention specific properties, but I think people might know of some of them that just were not doing their due diligence removing snow, which leads to people not being able to walk, go to and from bus stops, use mobility devices, etc. It blocks off even businesses that are doing a great job. If you're doing a great job and to the north and the south of you, the sidewalks aren't cleared, well, that's actually directly affecting that business that's doing their best job and doing, really being a partner to the city. And so we tried to look for a solution to that. The short version is our current contractor is not even willing to bid on the north end of it, and because it just would not work with the equipment they have. It's not that they're being mean. Other contractors that we briefly looked at are at a notably increased rate from initial statements of 2 to 3 times the dollar amount per linear foot that our current contractor is. So we're kind of in a rock and a hard place because on one hand, we certainly don't want to burden businesses, especially ones that are already doing their part, by charging them an exorbitant amount of money for snow removal. At the same time, we can't allow Robert Street to be partially impassable at the north end of the city. And as somebody who, obviously has strong feelings about the success of the north end of the city, and I love the north end of Robert. It's fun and scrappy, and there's lots of small businesses up there. And so I want them to have the best chance to succeed. So we have to come up with some way to fix this. And staff is going to look a little deeper into that. There were some ideas. One of the ones that I mentioned, and it's unfortunate, and I don't like to put us in this position, is we may just have to really be heavy-handed in enforcement of people that are not clearing that snow. And I don't like to do that. It's not my preferred way to deal with these situations, but it has to change. It can't continue the way it is, and it's not going to get better, because I know for a fact that what happens when you have a situation like this is the person who's doing the good job rightfully starts to go, well, nobody else is doing this, so you know what? I'm going to do okay, but I'm not doing as well. And then suddenly we get into an even worse and worse situation. So the short version is we're not going to let it go away. It's not like we're just going to be able to, nothing we can do, because we just have to do something. So what form that's going to take, I think it's going to take a while. I don't think we'll have it figured out for this winter. I think we're probably at kind of a Waterloo point. I hate to say this, but we're partway through August. Snow will fall sooner than I want to believe it will, thanks to living here. So I'd say at this point, we probably don't have a solution for this winter, other than maybe the solution for this winter is just simply encouraging really getting on top of that area and making sure that people are doing what they have to do, just like you. If you're a single homeowner, you have to clear your sidewalk. We can hold businesses and other things to this, and should hold them to at least the same standard. So I try to be merciful, but I'm not super merciful about people that just are not are not trying to just follow the basic level that we ask our residents to do and our apartment owners to do. I can't give people a pass just because they're in a particular commercial corridor, the most important possibly that we have for pedestrians. So.
Well, and I know we've talked about this a lot, and we've already mentioned this, but like it's such a big deal because it's not just about convenience, it's about people literally being able to like physically get from their homes to their jobs, from their homes to grocery stores. And for folks who, you know, can hop over snowbanks, maybe you can just like make it work. But a lot of people can't physically do that and are going out to try to catch the bus or whatever and like may not be able to get to it or get on it if we don't manage the snow. And so so it can become a really serious matter pretty quickly when we're not taking care of it. So it really matters. And it was
and people with small children
children
and frankly I could hop over a snowbank a lot better when I was 20 than I could now.
Right.
It's not going to get any better for me or anybody else. And so I mean it's just sort of it there's got to be a solution there because it does affect people. They may not be the people that are always heard from the most, but I see it. I have a store up there. I see people having difficulty getting to and from things, and it bothers me, you know, and not for my own interests, but in general, it bothers me to see, you know, residents who are having a tough time living in our city because we have these problems in their way. So we're going to do something about it. I don't know what it is yet, but
if you have any
if you got ideas,
please send them our way.
Yeah.
And especially if you know, we both live on the north end of town. If you have like a business or if you like, you know, just love to hear from you, like what you would recommend.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would be a good solution? Yeah. So, okay, well then we got into council and really we just had a couple of items. Oh, first I want to mention in council comments, mostly they were about Night to Unite and how great it was. So yeah, it's another piece of really good news. Thank you all so much for all the work that you did to pull off, I think 50 block parties.
Yeah, that's something like that.
In our city, which is a lot.
It was a big list.
Yeah. And I know I got to go to some. I was really grateful to get to go out and talk to some neighbors. We heard really good things from everybody on the council. And then the other thing was, if you are interested, go ahead and register for fall Parks and Rec stuff. The schedule is up and the classes are up and would love to have you. And we have a new parks director, so parks programming is only going to get better too, which is awesome. So speaking of your tax dollars at work.
Yes. All right. And then for what we actually covered in the meeting, this one should be quick. You've heard about it before. The requirements for drive-throughs in our city, obviously, we're sort of changing the way that we approach drive-throughs in general. Pretty much the same as the last time we talked, but we did add also putting the same requirements in the B2 district, which is not a lot of spots in town, but a couple other places where it just doesn't make sense to have, drive-throughs in the way that it functions right now. And so I don't think that was a large enough change that it's going to have any direct practical effect anytime in the future, but it was just cleaner because there's no reason not to just include that because it's the same situation we're dealing with at B5 and B6. And so, we're going to just have pretty high requirements for how a drive-through can function. And obviously there's a lot of places where they just can't function because of the requirements we have, but those requirements are based on pedestrian safety, a lot of the kind of re-envisioning of not having massive parking lots and tons of asphalt and all this other stuff. So I think it's a good move. It really kind of came through our new city attorney, kind of looking in general at stuff. And that was, I think, something that was one of her recommendations or the firm's recommendations of probably ought to nail down this drive-through thing. And we're not prohibiting drive-throughs entirely. There are times where it is appropriate. There are places where it's appropriate. But we don't want to see people shoehorning drive-throughs in places where they're a huge pedestrian safety issue or a really disruptive thing in the character of the area. So, that's why we did all that. And so that's done now. That was the second.
That was done. And I think effectively you most people will notice nothing. We didn't have any proposals for drive-throughs.
No, it wasn't like we're freezing anybody out that was coming. It's just a general kind of guidance for the city, fits with the Renaissance plan, a lot of stuff. So.
Yep. And then finally, we have another sort of thing that we talked about that was a little bit complicated. We are adopted a smoke-free policy in West St. Paul. But last month we talked about this in council, and we were all really concerned. We didn't want it to go to our police. We think they're doing a great job, but we did not have any interest in recriminalizing something that the state just decriminalized. And then we also wanted to be really aware of equity issues and the fact that, while for like homeowners and stuff, it's easy to sort of like do whatever you want to do in your house. In a lot of apartment buildings, they've already banned smoking entirely. So that means not just tobacco, but marijuana and vaping and all that stuff. And so for a lot of folks who live in apartment buildings, there aren't that many places that they can effectively go. So this was a sort of compromise to address those things.
Kind of the short version is we already had a tobacco-free policy. And so what we did is we just expanded the concept of tobacco to be smoke-free. So we're basically following the same rules we've already established for tobacco use. And it is, primarily, city-owned property. And then the exception would be parking lots, street, sidewalks, and right-of-way. We are not going to come yell at somebody who is smoking a cigarette as they walk down the street. It would be a little bit of overreach, I would say. And then the big thing, and kind of the discussion that was key, was how to deal with city parks. And, there was a variety of ideas on that. What we really did is we established the same rules for smoking cannabis. We brought everything under one umbrella. If you're smoking a thing that's legal, that you kind of have to follow the same rules. And so, the big thing is 25-foot barrier away from basically places where it's likely that minors might be. So 25 feet away from playgrounds, athletic fields and courts when youth or youth groups are using them, the pool, the splash pad. These are going to be the things we're going to put up signage specifically saying no smoking of any substances. So we're taking off the fact, like, we're not trying to figure out, are you vaping cannabis, are you vaping tobacco, whatever. All of that gets way too confusing for people, and the last thing we want to do is make it hard for people to understand what's okay to do and what's not okay to do. And so we established it. We basically just opened the envelope to be like, if it's a smokable product, we already did this with vaping, because initially vaping didn't exist, and then it was just tobacco, cigars, cigarettes, etc. And then vaping got brought in, and the guideline with vaping was, well, bring it into the same guideline as other smoking substances. Now it's pretty easy to just take any form of cannabis that's smokable and bring it under the same guideline as vaping and tobacco. And obviously, we're going to watch what happens with this if this becomes problematic. This is a policy. The good thing about it being a policy is that it can change quickly. So if we see difficulties in the parks, if we see problems with whatever it is, we can move this. This could change. I mean, there was a suggestion to just simply not have smoking allowed in parks at all. And I guess my perspective on that was, it seemed like a pretty big jump that was reactive to cannabis legalization. I think the bigger concern people tend to have is that they don't want minors exposed to any smokable products. And so I felt like doing the same thing that we were doing with tobacco and with vaping, it was logical to just make that also the thing that we're doing with smoking of cannabis in whatever form. So it's where we landed, but it's not written in stone. Obviously, if people are having issues, once again, reach out, let us know. I think there's a balance. Obviously, we want to respect people's freedom to consume legal substances. It is the letter of the law. We do allow alcohol consumption in our parks and cans, so there's also that argument that, like, well, if you let people drink but you don't let them, vape cannabis, they're both technically legal intoxicating substances. You're kind of drawing weird lines there, I think. So I feel like the simplest answer is always the easiest answer.
Oh, and I want to mention that we did make an exception for cultural ceremonies.
Yes.
So, I think that's somewhat self-explanatory, but effectively, like, if it's a cultural ceremony, then there's an exception for it. And what I really want to emphasize about this was that our goal was to have a policy that, like, asks everybody to, like, be good neighbors.
Yeah.
That's basically it. So it's enforced by the Parks Department and by our city manager, not by the police. We're going to put up signs and education, do some like public education around it. But here's the thing. we don't care if you're an adult and it's legal. Like, you can do what you want. Just like be good to the other people who are around. I know.
I don't spend a lot of time in playgrounds watching people like hang out on the swing set smoking while kids are around.
Right.
Of anything. But still some guidelines are important because I want to give people the comfort that there isn't, that there's some structure there. But there are times where I feel like generally our residents do pretty well at treating each other well, and I've certainly seen people specifically staying further than 25 feet away, smoking cigarettes by the splash pad and whatever. I don't see a lot of people pushing the envelope on this one right now.
Well, and in fact, that's what we heard from our city too, that it's not been an issue that we've gotten a lot of complaints about.
Yeah.
If it is a bigger problem than we think it is, we would love for you to tell us about it and let us know, and let us know like what you think would be a sort of more reasonable solution, or if you're like, people are really pushing the limits on this, or like, no, they're just doing it anyway. I mean, we can take more drastic measures, but we need
to have a reason to take drastic measures.
Right.
I mean, and again, my hope is that people are reasonable about this. I think generally they are. So if that's wrong, we can't be in every park at every time. If there's particular spots there's issues, if there's something we're missing, and I am the first to admit there may be something we're missing where suddenly it's like, oh, that is a huge hole in this. We need to expand it. But I again think that we have to also look at it the same way as tobacco consumption. So if it's and that would be the thing, is we're not going to change. Well, cannabis has this rule and tobacco has this rule. Right. It's going to be an all, and I think that's one of the things I like about this policy is it's very easy to just say you can't smoke anything in this area. Like we're not trying to determine like what you're vaping or anything like that, because that's a fool's errand, I would say at this point. So
and just I mean, like really this policy is really just like, hey, here are some guidelines to be like kind to the people who are also using this park. Because I know I was at an event last week in a city, in not a West St. Paul park, but in another park where there were people sitting 10 feet behind us and smoking, and I was there with all of my kids, and like that was really frustrating. And my kids were really frustrated about it because they don't want to be sitting in that either. So it's really like to give folks some guidelines, like here's how we be good neighbors, like let's just do that. So that's it. Thanks everyone. Let us know what you think. We'll be happy to take any feedback, or I'm just going to my Apple Watch so I can not have to reach all the way across the
magic.
table.
It's cool.
I know.
I like it.
Pretty sweet.
My watch doesn't do that.
But let us know if you have any thoughts or feedback or ideas. We're always open and honestly like to hear from all of you. So
100%.
thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.